Do you want to start your polymer clay journey but don't know where to begin? Don't worry, I got you. This video is a cheapskate's guide to starting out. You might be wondering, did she say cheapskate? I'm not a cheapskate. Is this video for me? Well, yes, and let me explain. I have been working with polymer clay for nearly 9 years, during which my personal tool collection have drastically increased. However, I always find myself reaching for the same tools over and over again, completely abandoning all the other ones I have. So let me tell you a secret. You don't need nearly as many tools as you might think to start out. When I scroll through Instagram or TikTok and I see a quick tutorial in any of the craft disciplines, the comments I usually see and want to address fall into two categories. People who think, oh, this looks easy, I can do that, then they rush to the shop to buy the kit and abandon the craft pretty quickly or never even follow through with it. And on the other hand, people who are already crafters, just not in polymer clay discipline, and they want to try this new to them craft, but they are also uncertain about sticking with it. I mean, I'm quite guilty of that sometimes. And you might have also heard of this oh so popular quote that buying craft supplies and using them are actually two separate hobbies. Can you relate to any of that? I assume you can on some level. So I would like to invite you to sit back, relax, have an open mind, and let someone who has worked with polymer clay for nearly a decade help you determine what things are actually necessary to buy and what things are optional to starting out with polymer clay. So switch off your maximalist compulsive buyer brain for a second and think like a cheapskate for the rest of the video. If you're gonna stick with polymer clay as a craft, you can always build your collection of tools over time as you progress with the craft. The tools aren't going to disappear from the shops if you don't buy them today or prior to starting the craft, I promise you. Okay, so let's dive into this head first and talk about polymer clay first, because you need the medium itself to start a craft. I will make a separate video on discussing different brands of polymer clay and their unique properties, but for now I would recommend picking whatever starter kit you can get your hands on, apart from Sculpey 3.
Rejected.
Female Professional True Colors set is a brilliant starting point. It comes with a leaflet with color recipes which will help you understand color theory, thereby allowing you to create a ton of new colors from original ones that come in this set. In my opinion, conducting color mixing experiments with this set will allow you to understand color theory and create your own colors with ease instead of paying others online for color recipes. This leaflet is actually from the very first polymer clay set I ever laid my hands on 9 years ago. So this is what got me hooked on this brilliant medium. But one thing about this set is that it's not gonna get you very far because it comes only with 6 blocks of clay, so you're gonna run out of those pretty quickly if you're a keen crafter. So alternatively, I can recommend this Primo set. So this set comes with 24 different colors and it's a good starting point for trying variety of different polymer clay projects. If you're getting your polymer clay set in a physical store, that store might make this choice for you because majority of the European craft stores would stock Fimo because it's a German brand, and shops like Hobby Lobby and Michael's will definitely have Sculpey because this is an American brand. There are quite a lot of unbranded polymer clays out there as well, however they are mainly aimed at children and are not recommended for more of a professional use. If you can buy polymer clay locally and save on shipping costs, that's great. However, if you don't have any local craft stores, there are plenty of options online. If you are buying polymer clay online, I don't recommend that you jump straight to Amazon. So many shops carry polymer clay now and they have sales at different times of the year, so always shop around for the best offer out there. If you have found a new craft store online and you have never shopped with them before, I highly recommend signing up to their newsletter because chances are they might email you a little discount code for a first time purchase. Once you have your polymer clay secured, you will need a work surface. If you are already a crafter, you might have a glass cutting mat, and this would be perfect for working on your polymer clay projects, and once they are ready for curing in the oven, you can just transfer them onto a baking tray. If you don't have a clean baking tray, you can just line it with baking paper or put standard A4 printing paper on it and just put that into the oven. If you don't have that, don't panic. Check your kitchen. If you have a granite, marble or a glass chopping board, you can use those ones as well. The trick is to not pick up anything that is porous, such as wood chopping boards. You can't use those ones at all. But if you don't have a chopping board either, you will want one of these. This is a ceramic tile I picked up from my local home improvement store. This was actually made for bathrooms and kitchens. So if you have renovated your property recently, double check if you have any of these lying around before you rush to the shop to buy more. Sometimes when you go to a home improvement store, they sell samples, so you don't necessarily need to buy a pack of 20 just to get one tile. However, if you can buy a few, I would recommend getting maybe 2 or 3, just in case you're working on a larger project. You will see that this ceramic tile has a slight shine to it, so when you're picking a tile in a store, I would recommend picking the one that has no relief on it, that is completely smooth, and the shiny ones are better. And it's good not only for crafting on, but also when your project is finished, you can pop this straight in the oven for curing because these are heat resistant. Side note, curing is hardening polymer clay usually in the oven for the recommended length of time and recommended temperature. And the reason why I said usually oven is because I've seen a couple of makers out there curing polymer clay in air fryer these days. So to recap, baking is for cookies and pies, and cooking is for all the other foods. So when you want to be all fancy and talk all the correct terms when it comes to polymer clay, you would say curing. Okay, back to the subject matter. If you have walked into your hardware store and they have told you that they only sell ceramic tiles by the square meter, I have a hack for you to get a free sample. So what you want to do is go online and type in ceramic tile samples. Google will then show you a ton of online tile shops that offer sending up to 5 samples to your house for free. Yes, they will even cover your shipping costs. Shop around for these, as some stores will only offer you the offcuts, which might have sharp edges and generally small sizes, whilst other shops will send you a full-size tile perfect for polymer clay projects. And let me show you free tiles I got for my smaller projects. I even used some of these as photo props because they had a relief on them. Now that we covered all suitable working surfaces, let me tell you what you cannot use. Avoid all wooden chopping boards, all plastic cutting mats, and basically anything that is porous. Let me explain further. Polymer clay is vinyl plastic that has been mixed with liquid plasticizers, oils, binders, and fillers. When polymer clay is left on a porous surface for a prolonged period of time, the plasticizers will seep into the surface, expanding it. So when you look at the surface, you will see uneven and raised parts. And I'm talking from experience here. I once left a sheet of polymer clay on one of these self-healing cutting mats, and then the next morning when I removed it, I did see all those uneven bumps on it. When polymer clay is fresh straight out of the factory, it is just a little bit too soft to work with, so people tend to place it between 2 sheets of paper just to draw some of that excess plasticizer out and make it easier to work with. In polymer clay community, this process is called bleaching. I usually do it with Cernet, and you can try it out for yourself, but you wouldn't really want to undergo this process on your work surface because you would want that thing to last you a long time. And once you have your polymer clay on a work surface, you will need to condition your clay before you can start working with it. When clay sits for a prolonged period of time, the particles in it will kind of settle and polymer clay will become stiff. And then we condition polymer clay to kind of disturb those particles. And this makes polymer clay a bit more elastic, a lot smoother, easier to work with, and it will stick to itself a lot better as well. In other words, we condition polymer clay to make it more workable. To draw a comparison and help you understand what I'm talking about, think about matcha latte. Matcha is a powder made from green tea, and if you think about tea leaves, you know that they don't disintegrate in hot water when we make a cup of tea. So when we make matcha latte, the powder doesn't disintegrate in milk either, it simply mixes with it. So if you left your matcha for quite some time, the green powder would sink to the bottom of the cup and you'll be left with only the white milk at the top instead of the green drink. So to regain that green color, you would have to mix your cup of matcha again. So I hope that this comparison helps. Essentially, conditioning polymer clay is massaging it to make it more pliable. People in community are also using pasta machine, then this thing called Never Need, and also a tiny craft hammer. And I can confirm, hammering polymer clay also works. I have to say, I absolutely love my pasta machine, not only for conditioning, but also for mixing colors faster and achieving uniform thickness in my clay sheets. However, I did not have pasta machine for the first 2 or even 3 years of my polymer clay journey, and I can guarantee that you can condition clay by hand or by roller. Find cheap pasta machines online, however they're not gonna last you a great deal of time, they do often break. Polymer clay community raves about Atlas pasta machines, especially now that they have come up with a newer model which has easily removable blades, and that makes it so much easier to clean your pasta machine. These usually cost around £109 when you shop around on different websites. And then of course there's also Lucy Clay Polymer Clay Conditioning Machine. However, that costs you around £900 and you can only buy it at certain times of the year and they don't ship to the UK. So polymer clay conditioning machine is definitely a large investment in your craft. However, you do need to splash out on one at the very beginning, well, unless you're super wealthy and you really want to. Your hands will do the job, but I highly recommend that you get a roller. I use this acrylic roller from Fimo, but you can also get one from Sculpey. Cernet has recently come out with a stainless steel roller, which is amazing from what I hear, but honestly, it doesn't matter which one you get because all of them are gonna do the same job. With that being said, you can also get away without buying a roller if you already have a ceramic cookie dough roller at home. I have this Casketston ceramic roller which came in a kit with a matching apron, cookie cutter and a spatula. This roller is large, but it works fine. If you have a stainless steel dough roller, that's fine too. The only difference between your and Cernet roller will be the size, as clay roller would be a lot smaller. If you don't have either, an empty bottle of wine will do just fine, especially if it's a dessert wine, because those bottles are usually a lot slimmer and taller. Now let's move on to discussing thickness guides. If you're looking to make flat and two-dimensional polymer clay earrings or sheets of clay to wrap around jars, you might have looked at a thing called thickness guides. Thickness guides allow you to achieve uniform thickness in all your polymer clay sheets without a pasta machine. Thickness guides are a good tool, but if you're on a budget, there's a workaround for that too. You can use playing cards. So let me show you how thickness guides work, and then you can already imagine how you can use playing cards for that technique instead. You can divide the stack of cards in equal parts and place on either side of your clay. Then place the roller on these cards and keep rolling until the thickness of the clay is matching up with the level of the cards. You can adjust the stack of cards depending on your desired thickness, and there you go! Another cheapskate hack for you. Once our polymer clay is prepped, you're probably going to start thinking about cutting it. Tearing will work, absolutely. However, if you want to have very straight lines and be very precise, you're going to start thinking about cutting tools. And we have now arrived at the first tool I actually deem a must-have, because there's no alternative that I have found that works just as good as this tool. So drum roll please! It's a tissue blade! Here is the visual aid of Fimo and Sculpey branded blades. You will notice that both brands offer 3 blades in the packet, and I'll talk you through these. First blade you get is the thickest of the 3, and it will allow you to cut polymer clay blocks in smaller sections if you're not using the entire block for your intended project. It will also allow you to cut straight lines, which is handy for things like making neat checkerboard patterns or cutting thin sheets of polymer clay canes, which are essentially long sausages of clay that carry a neat pattern inside, like this plant leaf I made when attending Astrid Wilk's workshop in Polymer Week 2023 event. Second blade is a lot thinner and it's very flexible. It allows you to cut curved lines and also helps you pick up your creation from the work surface without distorting the shape of your work. Simply slide the blade between your work surface and clay, separating the two, and then you can slide the blade underneath your work and use it to pick it up. Third blade is the one that I hardly ever use, however I consider that to be a package deal when you're buying the entire set. If the first two I consider being must-have tools that are very functional and I use them all the time, then the third one is more for like experimenting with different patterns and cutting interesting shapes. As a beginner, it will be a fun project to create a wavy line pattern, however in your day-to-day polymer claying life you're not going to be using it all the time. Next cutting tool is an X-Acto knife or a scalpel. These are very cheap to buy, usually £1 with 3 replacement blades, so just go for this one. It will be super handy, I promise. In fact, it will be very useful when discussing the next set of tools. I guarantee that you will be shocked to hear that as someone who makes and sells 3D printed cutters for fellow makers, I do not recommend for beginners to buy these, and hear me out. Yes, cutters do allow you to cut out precise shapes easily with very minimum sanding needed afterwards. However, when you are a beginner trying to figure out if this craft is for you, realistically speaking, how much use are you gonna get from a very intricate cutter? Detailed cutters really do limit your creativity because you'll be only thinking about cutting out that shape over and over and over again. The novelty will wear off very fast. Certain shapes you can modify. For example, if you bought yourself a circle cutter, you can cut out many circles, but then you can also cut out a circle that you will then cut in half, giving you 2 moon shapes. You can also make a slit in the middle of your circle shape and then twist each end on the opposite directions, giving you yet another interesting shape. Unless you're planning to use that cutter around 1,000 times for cutting that same shape out, thereby saving time, I do not recommend that you start investing money in cutters. There are numerous polymer clay destash groups on Facebook, and people are all selling cutters on these because the novelty of using that shape wears off very, very easily, and people who got into creating with polymer clay with only using cutters just get bored of the craft so easily. There's so much more you can do with polymer clay than just using cutters with the same shapes over and over again. Besides, everyone else is using the same shape too. If you'll learn how to cut out your own shapes with the X-Acto knife, the tool that we've just discussed, you can avoid that entire cutter craze. So let me share another cheapskate trick with you. You can draw your own quirky shapes on iPad and print that out, or draw directly on a piece of paper. Cover the shape with sellotape and cut out the silhouette, or use a laminator if you have one already. This will serve as a good silhouette stencil. Place the stencil on your sheet of clay and use your X-Acto knife to trace it. The trick here is to keep your knife exactly perpendicular to your clay. If you want a mirrored shape in case you're making earrings, flip your silhouette upside down and trace again. Voila! It's that easy! Let's move on to texture mats, texture rollers, and transfer sheets. Are texture mats cool? Yes, of course, but very similar to the cutters. Once the novelty of that intricate design wears off after 10 odd uses, what is going to happen with that texture roller? Let me tell you, it will go into its dedicated drawer, never to see the light of day, and it will sit there just in case you need it for something in the future. Do I have some? Yes, of course. That's how I know they're fake, and that's why I'm warning you not to buy a chunk of them. Firstly, think about whether you could imitate that texture with something that you already have. For example, one of the most popular texture rollers and texture mats currently are imitating fabrics such as lace and denim, and the latest craze is to finish the backs of your earrings with sandpaper rollers. But here's the deal. You can achieve all of those textures on polymer clay with the stuff you already have at home. The chances are that you already have a shirt or dress at home that has a little bit of lace detail on it. Or maybe you have your favorite pair of jeans that you wear every weekend. Once you roll out your sheet of clay, you can actually press the fabric directly onto your clay to leave an impression, and that will achieve exactly the same result as the texture roller or a texture mat, without spending any additional money. The same goes with sandpaper effect tools. You can use the actual coarse sandpaper to achieve the same effect. But you might be thinking now, but I need those texture mats to achieve mokomegane technique. No, you don't. Actually, using texture mat is only one way of achieving that effect on your clay. You can use the same technique without the mat just by making indents with different tools in your polymer clay. You can even use buttons to create indents in your clay and create funny textures. And if you're truly crafty, you can make your own texture sheets from polymer clay or with glue gun, but that's for another video. Now let's talk about image transfer sheets and water slides. If you have a printer at home, you can make these yourself with the pattern or a picture that you want to see on them, rather than buying someone else's sheets that have the same design as everyone else is currently using. You just need to buy a very specific paper for that. If you don't have a printer, you can buy it from another maker. However, everyone is going to be using the same exact design. The next tool is completely optional, and in fact it's not even a must-have for many clay-ers out there. However, I cannot create a video on beginner tools without mentioning my absolute favorite tool of all times. Here it is. So the paint has even come off from the tool because you can see that I'm using this end a lot. And you might be wondering now, what do you do with a tiny spoon that looks like it's meant for drugs? So this is smoothing tool from Fimo, and it allows you to do a handful of different things. For example, you can pick up very miniature bits of polymer clay and place them elsewhere on your design when you need them, and this way you avoid leaving fingerprints in those hard to reach areas. I also scrape pasta machine poo from my pretty sheets of clay. You see, small bits of clay often get stuck between the rollers of the pasta machine, and then they reappear at random moments when you're mixing a different colored clay. It's almost like one of those rules of physics dictating that sandwich always falls with the buttered side down, and a pasta machine will return the colorful bits of clay to you when you're trying to condition light color sheets of clay. You can also shape clay with a tip. You might have seen some of my fruity creatures on my social media accounts. They have texture inside their mouth, and it can be achieved with this tool. And just like the name suggests, it can also smooth things. You can also blend clay parts together, like so. It's particularly useful when you're sculpting something. For example, I used it non-stop when making this body silhouette. So the other end of this tool is a drill bit. This is definitely not essential when you're just starting out because you can always use a toothpick to pierce the hole in your uncured clay. However, you have to be very precise and make sure that you're poking all the way through all layers of clay, because otherwise you might just create a dent, and after curing you'll discover that there's not actually a full hole for you to string your chain through. Drilling a hole after curing will definitely look a little bit more professional because there wouldn't be any dents surrounding the hole. However, this is actually quite a thick drill. It's 2.5 millimeters and it's fine for those bigger, larger jump rings. However, if you want to create something dainty and very tiny, it might just be a little bit too large. Overall, it's still a good starting point for drilling. If you do find yourself creating a lot more jewelry in the future, you might want to buy yourself a micro drill, but for the time being, as a beginner, this works fine. And you know, you're actually getting two tools for the price of one. Now that I spoke about my favorite Fimo tool, you might be thinking, right, okay, well, Fimo tools are really good, and since they only create a handful of specialty tools, they all must be good, so I'll just get the lot. But wait, this is your shopaholic brain talking to you again, so stop it! Us makers love collecting tools. It's like a hobby on its own. But when you're just starting out and you're not entirely sure what a certain tool is for, just avoid getting it. Don't ever rush into buying anything at all. If you will then feel the need for the tool later on and you will be confident that you want to stick with this medium, you can get the tool then. And just because a tool is created by a reputable company and you have their other tools, doesn't mean that every tool is good. In fact, let me show you a tool that I definitely regret buying. Here they are, these Fimo plastic tools. You're probably thinking, what were you thinking? I know, I was young, I was inexperienced back then. I thought, yeah, I love Fimo, I'll get these Fimo tools.
Wrong.
Big mistake. This is also old packaging. They have upgraded packaging, same tools, newer packaging. These tools are made from plastic and I think they'll definitely be fun for kids to poke their Play-Doh with, but don't spend your hard-earned money on these. I don't know if you can see it, but there's a line running through all of these tools, like a seam, but it's not only in the middle of the tool, but it's also at the bottom. So even when you're like poking a hole in your polymer clay with this tool, it does create that extra dent for where the seam is. You know, you live, you learn, but this is where you can learn from my mistakes and don't repeat them. Don't rush into buying things. There are definitely a lot more tools that I regret buying over the past decade. Let me know if you would like a separate video on that. There's tons of times when you see a tool and you think, wow, I mean, I do that part very often, I'll definitely need that tool, and then you buy it and then you think, actually, well, it's a bit fiddly to achieve the same thing that I can do a lot quicker manually, and it's just not worth it. So think twice about whether you need it or not. And now we are approaching the last section of this video, and that's the tools you already have in your house but you don't think of them as polymer clay tools. First up are manicure tools. I got this set for Christmas one year, I think, and it's definitely for manicure, but look at all these delicious tools. I use all of these ones for sculpting. I don't know if this is a cuticle pusher or whatnot. It allows you to smooth bits of polymer clay, create dents, create textures. It's pretty good. Got this little spoon. I create animal mouths with this one, and there's even a needle tool there. I could make guide drill holes. Obviously, I'm not telling you to go to the shops and buy a manicure set now. However, if you do have one, why not have dual use out of the tools you have? Then I got this little set from Primark for £2. I think it was for popping spots or pimples on your skin, but I also use this set for sculpting too. Next up are all the nail tools. I love the tiny paintbrushes that are made for manicures because they're so small that I can create tiny details on polymer clay and adding accents. All the glitters, mica powders and chrome powders that they use on nail art, you can use all of that on polymer clay to create shiny and sparkly effects. You can even use flocking powder that they use for nails to make your polymer clay all fuzzy and velvety. And whilst on the subject of mica powders, all your eyeshadow palettes, they can go on polymer clay as well. So go nuts and try your makeup and nail art products on your polymer clay. However, if it does get a little bit messy, don't worry. Use acetone and a Q-tip to clean up your polymer clay. Next up are the tools you already have in your kitchen or a baking cupboard. Perhaps you already have some cookie cutters that you can now repurpose and use on polymer clay. And you know those tiny graters they usually use for nutmeg at Christmas time? You can take that and use it with polymer clay to create that fancy terrazzo effect. You can use a potato peeler to slice your polymer clay canes very, very thinly because Lucy Slicer would set you back a pretty penny. You can also use things like stainless steel bowls and glass jars to put your clay on top of them and pop them in the oven because these things are going to survive your oven curing just fine. For example, I cured this necklace on this bowl as I wanted that curve on the necklace so it would sit better on my collarbone. You heard me right, glass and steel things are oven safe. Next section in tools you already have, I will encourage you to look at household and DIY items. Let me tell you another polymer clay secret. If you don't have the tool from Sculpey for making hollow beads, you can use an old light bulb. So if you've been listening closely, you'll catch my drift and you'll start to think about other household things you can now use with polymer clay. And that's exactly the kind of mindset I would like you to have. Your husband might not like your new polymer clay hobby because he'll catch you borrowing his rotary tool for drilling holes in your polymer clay earrings. You'll even get into his toolbox for pliers to bend those jump rings into shape. You can use Phillips screwdriver for adding interesting texture in your clay for that mokomagane technique. Even a golf ball would roll out an interesting pattern on your clay. If you have had another crafty hobby beforehand, maybe some of those tools and materials could be used with polymer clay now. For example, if you used to paint, you can now paint on polymer clay because you can use acrylic paints, pastels and alcohol inks on polymer clay. If you used to sew, you can use jeans or lace fabric onto polymer clay to create interesting textures. You can use your needles or knitting needles to pierce your polymer clay beads. And actually, if you use Fimo leather, you can sew that polymer clay with your sewing machine. These were only a few examples, but you get the idea. The last thing I wanted to recommend to you is pastels. They're not really a tool and they're not really necessary, but boy do they add a lot of depth to your work with just a little touch of pastel here and there. Pan pastels are obviously amazing, but they're so incredibly expensive, so I recommend getting a set of these for about £10 and I'll show you ways to use these in future videos. So there you go. To sum up, there are only few tools I recommend for you to buy to get started with polymer clay, and those were your tissue blades, X-Acto knife and your clay roller. Everything else can just be collected as the time passes and you get more into the craft and you are confident that you want to stick with this hobby. In my future videos, I'll share a handful of different techniques that you can try out as a beginner with very limited amount of tools. And there you go. I hope that you picked up some useful tips from me today. And also, if I have missed out a tool that you deem a must-have, let me know in the comments of what that tool is. If you like this video, I would appreciate if you gave it a thumbs up, because that would make my mother incredibly proud of me. And I hope to see you again next week.